Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Bridging Research and Clinical Guidelines, Interactive Strategies for Medical Affairs Success, a Pharma Forum webinar brought to you in association with Opmetric. I'm Eloise McLennan, I'm Pharma Forum's Deep Dive Editor and I'll be your moderator for today's session. Now, as medical affairs continues to take on more of a strategic role within organizations, understanding how to harness real-world data and digital insights is essential. Now, today, we'll be exploring how these insights are being integrated into medical affairs strategies to enable smarter decision-making and more agile responses to scientific developments. But before we dive in, there are just a couple of housekeeping notes to go over. You can submit questions at any time using the Q&A box on your screen. We'll address as many of those as we can during the session. We're also posting live updates on Blue Sky throughout the webinar. If you feel free to join the conversation, follow #PPWebinar, and you can join in on there. Finally, if you miss anything and don't want to, or you want to revisit today's session in full, a full recording will be available to view on demand after the session has finished. We'll also be running 2 live polls throughout today's webinar. I'll let you know when we open each one. And speaking of polls, we have one for you to begin with, which I will just make live now. So our first question is, how does your team currently use clinical guidelines in your medical affairs strategy? Your options are to shape scientific communication plans, to support access and reimbursement discussions, to identify evidence gaps for future studies, or we don't actively integrate guidelines into our strategy. Please do take a moment to share your answer. We will reveal the first results of today's first poll shortly. Now, I am delighted to introduce our expert speakers for today's session over the next hour. First up, we have Erikka Brewer, who is an MD, Product Solutions Manager at Digital Science, and Carlos Areia, Senior Data Scientist, also at Digital Science. They'll be helping us explore today's topics in more detail. Now, Erikka, to begin, let's talk about the evolving role of medical affairs in bridging research and clinical practice. Can you walk us through why clinical guidelines matter so much for medical affairs teams and how digital insights can enhance evidence-based decision-making in pharma?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Eloise, for the introduction. So first of all, I would like to talk about the evolving role of medical affairs and why this is so important. And I remember I used to work as a medical science liaison when this transformation started to happen. And it was very exciting to see how all those insights that we were bringing from the field were not only transformative from a tactic perspective and from a strategic local perspective, but also we're transforming the conversation within the organization, within medical affairs, within the whole pharmaceutical industry. And then what is really important here to notice is like medical affairs has significantly transformed from a supportive to a highly strategic role within healthcare organizations. And today, medical affairs professionals serve as critical bridges connecting scientific research, and that is directly involved with clinical application. Now, the expectations for medical affairs have evolved. And what does that mean is like the leaders in medical affairs are now required to clearly demonstrate the real world impact of their scientific exchange activities. And more than ever, the strategic imperative is clear: harnessing real world data and digital insights. And this is not only, isn't just beneficial, it is essential for success. Now, connecting the dots on related to your question. Now, why clinical guidelines matter for medical affairs? Clinical guidelines are systematically developed documents that provides evidence-based recommendations, and they are designed to support healthcare professionals in decision-making for specific clinical conditions. Now, these guidelines act as a crucial bridge translating clinical research into real-world patient care, and they influence physician prescribing behaviors, payers' decisions, and regulatory alignment, directly impacting market access and reimbursement strategies. Then for pharmaceutical companies, the inclusion of this data is critical because represents a significant high impact milestone, underscoring the credibility and applicability of their research. Now, let's take a look at 4 practical ways medical affairs can maximize value from clinical guidelines, insights, and digital influence data. The first one is elevate scientific influence into a strategic planning. And basically, the key here is first map where and how your evidence is cited, whether it's guidelines, policy documents, or educational programs. Now, these insights shape the scientific narrative, steer the KOL engagement, and arm market access teams with compelling proof points. Now, the second point is use guidelines as a gateway, not endpoints. And this is very important because a guideline mention isn't a finish line, it's a green light. And this basically indicates a signal, those signals that your research is ready to influence the practice. Now, track these moments to fine tune MSL outreach, refresh educational materials, and plan post launch evidence generation. I think that's very critical. Now, the third point is breach evidence with impact using digital signals. And what does this mean basically is like we invite you to use and leverage tools to surface citations and take a look at that high impact, non traditional channels, policy PDFs, guidelines appendices, and even mainstream media. And these signals help justify ongoing medical investment, strengthen the internal KPIs, and support cross functional storytelling. And last but not least, focus on integration, no data volume. And this is very important because more data isn't the goal. Smarter decisions are. And then for this, adopt a targeted approach that prioritizes signals aligned to strategic objectives, avoiding vanity metrics and ensuring insights enhance rather than distract from decision making. Now, this will bring us to this slide where I wanted to show 3 main pillars for a strategic opportunity in medical affairs. The first one is adoption challenge. Now, here, clinical guidelines present a significant opportunity in medical affairs for real, or they really face medical affairs teams, face real adoption challenges. And these include regional variations, clinical practice, inconsistent physician adherence, for example, and limited visibility. And now this takes us to the second pillar. While you cannot see the title, there is digital measurement opportunity. And this is where digital tools help us to leverage that content and provide early indicators of scientific influence. Now, here you can take a look at citations and guidelines, policy documents, references, and stakeholders. With this, you can centralize and identify those early signals of adoptions in your literature, as I mentioned before. And then last but not least is strategic value. And this is where everything comes to our reality when we analyze that data. What are we going to do with that data? What are the action items that we're going to develop as part of that understanding that now I have? Now, take a look at that data, and then that will complement traditional metrics for the traditional metrics, and that will help you to create a comprehensive impact assessment. And then you will identify knowledge gaps, reveals dissemination patterns, and track scientific resonance. And that will close the whole circle for you in medical affairs to develop a strategy based on clinical affairs and clinical guidelines for your impact in the field. I'm going to
before we hand things over to Carlos, I'm just going to bring our first poll to an end. So the answers to how does your team currently use clinical guidelines in your medical affairs strategy, we had a bit of a split. No one responded to shape scientific communications plans. 25% said to support access and reimbursement discussions, 25% to identify evidence gaps for future studies, and 50% said they don't actively integrate studies into strategy. Is that a surprise? Were you surprised by those results, or are those in line with what you're seeing at the moment?
I think this is part of what we're seeing at the moment, and we want to transform this in a more comprehensive plan for medical affairs. And taking the medical affairs community and the pharmaceutical industry to understand how these digital tools can help them to enhance and leverage information from citations, from policy documents and guidelines will be crucial for them to strengthen their action plan and their strategy. So this is pretty common. This is something that we really want to keep develop to the point where these teams, the medical affairs teams, integrate all of the concepts and all the digital tools to increase the value of their messages. Carlos, what do you think?
Well, thanks. And hello, both. Hello, Eric. Hello, Louise. Hello, everyone. No, I think I was a bit surprised, to be honest, when I saw the results of the poll. 50% don't actively engage with the clean. Because for me, I think that's the closest endpoint that you have for return on investment of big trials. It's like you said, Erika, it's the beginning of the journey into clinical practice, but it's pretty much the closest point in terms of like mentions and like, for example, looking at this graph that I will break through in a bit, but I think it's the closest one that you have into real clinical impact. Yeah, I was a bit surprised. Okay, so I thought it would be interesting to start by do a brief over. I love this graph because it basically shows the life cycle of a publication attention. And this can be any publication. We're going to pretty much focus on clinical trials because that's what is mostly mentioned and relevant for medical affairs and used in clinical guidelines as to change practice or to update practice. But there is so much more to attention as well. So if you look at this graph, and you notice that I very lazily added clinical guidelines because we only recently added that to Altmetric. So this graph wasn't updated. So I did it. I kind of MacGyvered it. So when, for example, when you publish a trial, it's very normal in a few minutes or a few hours later, you and maybe the co-authors or the journal or the publisher to post about it on X or other social media platforms. So that's the quickest way of attention that usually publications get. But then after a few, even on the same day, if the trial has like really impressive results of something that's, I don't know, practice changing, sometimes on the same day, sometimes a few days later, news outlets tend to pick it up and to start disseminating it, and that will kind of boost it. More social media mentions, more attention, etc. It might go viral, and then some people read it, bookmark it. Some people will blog about it, like weeks down the line, and then some Wikipedia pages might start to get updated or featured in YouTube or podcasts. I don't know. It depends on the results of the trial and how big is it. A few months, weeks, usually months, citations start to come as well. Other studies start to use your research, and and start maybe mentioning some patents as well. It's usually a few months/years later, and usually policy and guidelines. It's it's getting better, but we're definitely not talking hours and days, not even weeks. And if you're lucky, maybe months, but it's usually years and quite a few. So pretty much guideline, although it's like we just mentioned, it's the closest to clinical practice in terms of like research attention that one can capture. It is the one that takes the longest to show.
And with that, we've arrived at the time for our second poll, which I will now make live. Once again, if you can get your answers into us. The question is, what is your biggest challenge in understanding how your evidence is used in the real world? Is it lack of access to real world data, regional variation in clinical practice, inconsistent guideline adherence, difficulty showing internal ROI on scientific activity, or are you not currently tracking this? While we wait for those results to come in, Carlos, I do have a question for you. Do trials with more social media activities actually translate into more clinical guideline mentions?
Well, that's a very good question. Well, to my knowledge, there is no formal study like actually going through and statistically proving yes, there is. We should probably do that now that we have clinical guidelines. I will do at some point. But there is some early indicators. Then yes, and this can be for a number of reasons that I can, off the top of my head, think of. Like, amplification of awareness is one. If you look at this graph, for example, you see like there's like huge wave of posts on social media that will reach different stakeholders, and some of them might be involved decision makers or policy makers, or they can be like spreading, amplifying awareness that a new drug has came out and a new phase 3 trial is finished, or this drug has been approved by FDA. That amplification can, well, disseminate to the right audience and to the decision makers. So, like there will be discussions around it, and these discussions might generate more attention, and that attention combined again might reach the right people, and there might be also some pressure, like on life-defining trials and life-defining therapies, etc. There might be pressure on society if the society is aware that something life-changing has just came out, on society to act on the results of a certain trial or a certain drug. And also, like, the overall research community is probably going to start citing it more. So although there is no formal studies proving that yes, that's the case, I think there are some good indicators that I think we can use as an assumption until someone like we can now test it properly.
Fantastic. Right, let's have a look at how our poll is doing. So, in the question of what your biggest challenge is to understanding how your evidence is used in the real world, again, 0% lack of access to real world data. 16% said regional variation in clinical practice. 33% said inconsistent guideline adherence. 50% said difficulty showing internal ROI on scientific activity. But nobody said they're not currently tracking this. So that's a step up from our last poll. Again, are these in line with what you're seeing in the real world?
Yeah. And I think it ends up on what Erikka mentioned, because it's not the end journey. Guideline is the beginning. A guideline is the earliest indicator that new drug might just enter the market and might start to be used in clinical practice. And it's difficult to show, to be able to track this. That's why I think having this start point is really important, because then you can maybe focus your efforts on that region or that country where the national guideline mentioned your clinical trial. So I think focusing efforts instead of having like trying to track all the guidelines and all the hospitals or all the institutions to see if they have used or not. I think this can be used as a tool as well, to get more targeted efforts and hopefully a bigger return on investment.
And before we move on with the rest of the slides, we have had one question in for you, Carlos, which is, looking at the research published, why isn't the activity presented at Congress mentioned? Is there a reason that is not explicitly identified?
That's a very good question, and it's something that I'm actually working on at the moment. So actually, for example, that's inside the posts. In this case, it's still tweets, because this graph is a bit outdated. Now it has changed to X, but it's all encapsulated inside social media attention. So if someone shares around congresses and shares the particular DOI of a publication or an abstract, it will be picked up through there. We are making efforts on splitting this, like for example, Congress tracking, and like specific to specific congresses like ASCO or ESMO, etc. And we're also getting a particular focus on abstracts from conferences as well. So we will hopefully in the near future have a breakdown of this.
Fantastic. Well, there's your answer. Keep your eyes peeled. Carlos, if you want to continue with the rest of the slides.
Sure thing. Well, I think I kind of already cover this, and I think all of the audience is aware of this, that it takes a lot of time from conception to market to bring a new drug. So it takes on average 14 years. So that's a lot of investment and a lot of. So getting back to the initial poll, people want to see the return on investment, and I think this is where the mentions of clinical guidelines medical affairs might have a play here, because it takes a long time from market to a clinical guide mention, and like people have spent more than a decade from discovery and development all the way through the preclinical and clinical phases, and then it still has to take like half a decade or a decade to have like this early insight that it might come to clinical practice. So I strongly believe this is something that there are some challenges that medical affairs might have an opportunity here. And I am.
Erikka, I just want to bring you in here. Why does it take so long from that first drug approval to the first clinical guideline mentions and adoption?
Thank you for the question. That is a very important one. I think it's because of the distance from the regulatory green light to a clinician's day-to-day practice. And that is bridged by, I would say, 4 important things. The first one is nowadays we need more real-world evidence data to support and provide long-term safety data to validate findings beyond controlled trials, which is what the pharmaceutical industry starts as part of their evidence generation. So when you have a controlled trial and publish the results, sometimes that is not even enough. So you need a real world evidence data that supports that use. And like I mentioned, just to bring more information in regards of long-term safety and efficacy, but outside of the clinical trial environment. Now, the second thing will be that sometimes the guideline panels meets not very often. So it takes a long time to get all those experts together and review the evidence so they can update and have that go like moving. So that can take a lot of time. And that depends, of course, on the organization and the therapeutic area, but that is the behavior. It takes time to get all of those experts together. The third thing that I would say is those panels, they need to forge consensus among clinicians, payers, regulators, and that process takes a lot of time and also can be high cost. And that also can be challenging for paradigm shifting drugs, and that is takes a lot of time to evaluate all that evidence and get everybody aligned. So that is another challenge. And finally, I would say that once the guideline is published, uptake various region as local policies and budgets and patient demographics. So it is not the same when you have a guideline published in the United States where the control trial was placed with population in the United States. And then if you take that to the region, for example, in South America, probably the local regulatory entities will take a look at that paper only as a reference, and they will see the experts will have to take a look and see if that really applies to the socio-demographic context in that region, and then they either create guidelines that use that as a reference, or they will base the decision-making process based on real-world evidence that they already have produced. So it takes a long time to get not only everybody talking about the same and getting in consensus, but takes a long time just to produce that, just take that publication, include it in the guidelines, and then take it to the practice. And that, of course, brings a lot of challenges for medical affairs because they need to continue the conversation while this publication is included in the guidelines. So there are a couple of challenges for medical affairs there while this happens.
And Carlos, do you want to talk us through the current challenges?
Well, yeah, I think Areia pretty much summed it. There are several things that can be done. Some things, like I mentioned before, spreading awareness, disseminating, making a dissemination plan, working with stakeholders and engaging the audience. I think what I took from Erikka's answer is that one of the key things, and I think that will tie up nicely with my next slide, which is actually the opportunities, because I do believe that medical affairs can be the drivers in bridging this gap, is like targeted dissemination. It's getting back to the first poll all over again, like the return on investment. So, like Erikka mentioned, like it varies from region to region, from group of stakeholders, from society to society. Some might engage sooner, some might be more aware, etc., etc. And there are other things that might also not be in so much control of the companies and the medical affairs. For example, some of them require like real world evidence study to come out before they consider to be in their guideline, or some are waiting for the health economic, because even though there might be a new drug might be effective, it might not be cost effective enough for that population. So there are several things, there are several challenges, but there's certainly something that can be done, and some of them can be actionable pretty. Not it will be quite not easy. It's not always easy, but it won't take that much effort to plan ahead. I will give some examples a bit, but I think now, especially with the exponential growth of AI and data all over, so it's all about targeted dissemination, making your efforts count, identify knowledge gaps. I think that was mentioned as well in one of the polls. Strategic publication planning, that I think everyone is aware of how important is it. And again, I will come back to this over and over again, engaging the right stakeholders. And and I'm going to add another thing since after Erikka's answer, which is in a timely manner. And reaching the right audience, like not only key opinion leaders, but also policymakers, regulatory bodies, but more importantly as well, clinicians, hospitals, advocacy groups, the patients themselves. So I think that medical affairs professionals can have some lead on this. Right. Going to move on to the next slide. Yes. So and thinking of that, and to give some practical examples, I think I'm going to give 2 or 3 examples of how we can make some data-driven decisions. Again, these are things that I assume that would be interesting, but there are very different ways to go about this, and very different analysis that one can do. Want to do this is just to basically try and trigger your creativity with your partners, with your data, with your company, that things that you might be able to track, and insights that might be hidden somewhere that you might be able to surface and look at it. So in this example, I'm going to try and explore the path to a guideline mention. So I reversed engineer what worked well, and well, they kind of both did work well, but one better than the other. So in this example, and by the way, these are real trials. I'm just not going to disclose them, but this is real data. So we have a product. I'm going to call it product A. The trial was published in 2020. Same thing for product B. Same similar therapy, same disease. Trial around the same time, also published in 2020. One took almost 1 year to the first guideline mention, and product B was 3 months for the first guideline, just a few months after it was published. Product A in total to date, I updated this last week, a total of 11 guideline mentions, and 1 was mentioned over the last year. Whereas product B had a total of 40, like almost 4 times over the product A guideline mentions to date, and 6 in just the past year. So I started looking into the data, like in terms of citations of both trials. They both have plenty of citations because the trial has been published for a few years now, so they still are being cited. Both of them mentioned in the news, especially after the results came out, or they were around when the drugs were approved. Plenty of social media dissemination and people discussing it, so on and so forth. So I decided to dig in. So what might be the difference between this? And again, what I'm going to show you might not be the only reason, but it probably will have a contribution to it. So I'm going to start over. I started to look at the citations, saying, okay, what kind of demographics cited it? And looking at product A, it was mainly universities with a couple of like hospitals and clinical facilities and other healthcare facilities citing it, but it was a very small proportion. Whereas the other one was still majorly towards the university side and some companies as well, but was the proportion of and the volume of hospitals and clinical and healthcare facilities citing was way bigger than product when compared to the product A. And if you look at the proportion, the percentage was way higher. So both in volume and proportion, clinical citations were there in product B. And then I cited the same for news. So, well, what kinds of news? Like, were mainstream? Were they specialized, like medical? And on product A, it was not as disseminated as product B on the news, but was half and half, maybe leaning towards the side of medical news outlets. But there was a big difference in product B. Product B was pretty much all medical, and the volume was way higher than the overall volume was way higher than product A. So it's a lot more shared and disseminated through medical news outlets. And then to finish, to put the cherry on top of the cake, I was like, okay, let's look at the demographics that are checking it. And most on product A was general public, people sharing it, etc., etc. Quite a few HCPs, actually, but not even close to the amount of general public or journals or publishers sharing it or researchers. Yeah, but when I looked, it was a lot more clinical. The clinical community was a lot more engaged. So I think it was probably half and half, if not more HCPs. Or not, yeah, HCPs and allied health professionals and etc. But also other types when I started to dig in, like the patients themselves and others, like policymakers. I saw a couple there too, some official accounts, but there were quite a few researchers as well, and so on and so forth. Like I said, this might mean not the whole reason, of course, the results themselves. I didn't dig into every single guideline to see how it was mentioned, etc., etc. But I do believe this, to some extent, had some part to play. Oh, I see. All right, let me move on to the next slide. To the next. Yeah.
Before you move, I just wanted to give a little bit of also an idea here that I think is important. So typically, medical affairs and communications team measure the omni-channel impact, right? Trying to get an understanding of these activities and tactics that they develop. And what I see here is also a huge opportunity to include clinical guidelines, the metrics that we can bring from that special content that clinical guidelines value brings to the table. So I guess to me, it's really strategic. How clinical guidelines add up to the conversation and leverage the content to improve the number of not only seeing this again, as I mentioned before, as vanity metrics, but a strategic impact in our community and our stakeholders. So I love this slide just because it really brings everything and it connects everything to a point where it's not only about an omni-channel strategy or medical strategy separated. It's how we can unify it all together and bring clinical guidelines to the conversation.
Brilliant. All right, so you might like the next one then as well. So next example, simpler way. So in this example, I've just analyzed in a very general overview. So this is not specific trials, it's all of the journal content. So if you can see here on this axis, it's the proportion of publications with clinical guideline mentions. So it's basically the percentage of publications with at least one guideline mention. And this is through the years. And here I'm comparing oncology journals. And this is all the journal activity. I'm not focusing on anything. And for example, if one of the, again, ROI metrics or one of the KPIs that you might want to track is clinical guideline use or clinical guideline mention, this is a very easy way to see where, by just selecting the right journal where to publish, might increase your likelihood. of a clinical guideline mention. And this can be used. I'm using clinical guidelines because that's the topic of the webinar here, but this can be used for anything. This is basically harnessing insights that we capture, and a lot of it is public data as well. And then it's basically trying to compile everything into and put it on a journal level. So in this case, for example, if that was one of the goals, then you can see that like 2 or 3 winners here, like the Cancer Journal or the Clinical Cancer Research in purple, and Journal of Clinical Oncology in I want to say light pink, salmon, beige. Don't know what color that is, but you can see like a very well. I know it's not a simple decision to select a journal, but comparing with all the 14 years before or the decade that with the preclinical and clinical stages and the drug developing, I think some efforts can be put into this to increase the likelihood of getting that new therapy to clinical practice faster. And that's what I was saying, that there is some part that medical affairs has to play here. All right.
I just want to ask, apart from sort of clinical guidelines mentions, are there any sort of journal metrics that medical affairs teams should be keeping their eye on?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's what I was saying. I show this on a clinical guidelines level, but this can be applicable for everything. There are several metrics, like just thinking in terms of journal. So, for example, and getting back to the type of audience, like a breakdown that I did on the previous slide, you can also do this by journal. It's like, who is the authorship? Is that mostly clinical? Is it coming mostly from academia, from industry? But also readership. For example, who consumes and who accesses these publications or shares it? In this case, are they mostly researchers, or clinicians, or even patients? You can even break down the demographic to like a patient level. Like I'm thinking rare diseases. Like, are you reaching like the target population? Are they aware there is like a new trial or a new therapy? So there are several things that one can do with a bit of creativity and knowledge. But it's important to know what you want or what it's relevant. So what types of signals, what types of metrics are you going to get that return on investment from? So once that is defined, it's just a matter of getting the right data and the right knowledge to do it. So, but that becomes a lot easier once the question is well defined. Okay, I hope that answers it. Right, perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to give one last example, and this will, I think, you will tie up in nicely what Erikka was saying in the beginning, which is, using data to see the geographical reach. So you can see, obviously, you can map where like your trials and your products have been used in clinical guidelines, and you can also benchmark it against competitors. So, for example, this is using real data of 4 different products, and you can just explore and see where, again, targeted dissemination, targeted focused efforts, where you can impact the most, or you should focus your efforts on, or like where your product is lacking, or where the other, basically, it will give you the right tools or the right knowledge to act upon. All right, I think that was pretty much it in terms of examples. That's what I wanted to show you. Actually.
Fantastic. Erikka, we'll hand it back over to you.
All right. Now, let's talk about measuring real world impact. And this will start adding up everything that we have, we have presented during this webinar. So here, I would say that measuring the real world impact for clinical research involves identifying the translational impact, especially recognizing when a research is referenced within a clinical guideline. And these references are very powerful indicators of practical real-world relevance. So now I think that's one thing that we need to keep in mind. Another thing is, like, if we strengthen or doing a strengthening of the evidence narrative by demonstrating clearly how research contributes to formal healthcare guidance, policy making, and broader healthcare conversations. That is crucial, and I think it has to be more and more included in the medical affairs strategy, because Carlos showed how that can definitely change the results and bring back the return of investment that pharmaceutical industry is expecting. So that's critical. But moreover, enabling a smarter engagement, tracking influence beyond traditional citations, and that extends to the policy mentions, media visibility, and healthcare provider interaction. So these insights enable more strategic, targeted, and impactful communications. And now, how we can integrate those digital insights. I think this comes to create a key strategic pillar. And this first here basically what we're trying to achieve, or what I try to show in this slide, is medical affairs uniquely bridge scientific research with real world healthcare applications and driving evidence-based decisions throughout the healthcare ecosystem. So that is the strategic pillar. We need to connect that communication between science and the real world application. Now, the clinical guidelines value. Now, as we explained and during this along this presentation, we need to create a message that really shape the clinical practice based on clinical guidelines and regulatory compliance and market access. And that will provide early and clear early signs of scientific influence. So as soon as we provide that clinical guideline value and we create that communication and that conversation, bringing that to the table, that will definitely helps to identify indicators of scientific influence. And that's will if we use digital tools to leverage this knowledge. And then lastly, practical integration. So that we want to integrate these digital tools. And I think I already mentioned this, but it's critical to incorporate more and more technology to identify those key mentions of our guidelines, to see what is working well, what we need to improve as medical affairs as part of the tactics that we are deploying, what we could do better to leverage that conversation with our key stakeholders. And then that's where digital tools help us to have a more comprehensive conversation of what the key actions that we need to do to put ourselves, not only the science, but the clinical guidelines, and shape the conversation towards something that really provides value to healthcare professionals, KOLs, and the patients community. Carlos, I'm gonna now I'll give it to you.
All right, perfect. Okay, so I think I will just conclude, and then we still have a bit of time for questions, I believe. So yeah, so I think, like Erikka said, there's been a noticeable evolution in medical affairs and professionals in the field, that everyone is quickly adapting to the evolving world as well. So and the clinical guidelines are a potential indication that therapies are being used. Like Erikka says, an early indicator, but it takes quite a lot of time to be mentioned. So it's both early and late. So it's an indication that the therapies might be start to get being used and recommended in clinical practice. So like I've been saying over the past couple of slides, medical affairs, I do believe medical affairs can be strategic facilitators and bridge the gap from trial approval to its mention or to its use in a clinical guideline. However, they do need the right tools for it. With the exponential growth on data and the AI and everything, there's also a lot of noise out there. And there's a lot of publications that never been this high. There's like tens of thousands of publications being done every week. So everyone needs to be more comfortable navigating and focusing on what really matters. And this is applicable for everything, for publications, for data, for metrics. And yeah, so increasingly so, people really need the right tools to do it and to help navigate in this noise. So with good foundational data and good metrics and with the right knowledge as well. So, and I think with that, I will stop here. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Carlos. We have now, as Carlos briefly alluded to, arrived at our question and answer section of the session. If you do have any questions for either Erikka or Carlos, please do get them into us. Erikka, we do have one that's come in for you, which is how are Med Affairs professionals planning to contribute to ICH E6 R3 compliance, both internally and externally?
That's a very interesting question. My insights here will be internally. Medical affairs teams will help to, for example, be involved in the revision of the SOPs and study plans to focus on trial elements that matter the most. So critical to quality factors from day one. That's one of the things that medical affairs can do internally. Other thing that medical affairs can do to support this compliance normative, let's say, will be to strengthening oversight, and that means joining cross-functional quality teams that performs the risk assessments and monitor compliance and throughout the protocol design, data collection, and reporting. And that is critical. Medical affairs can participate and give a voice there, providing the insights that they have collected from the field, but also the knowledge, the clinical knowledge. So that is very important. And internally also they can update in training. So then, for example, rolling out new GCP modules for all internal stakeholders, so everyone understands the guidelines risk-based approach. So that was one thing. And externally, empowering sites and investigators. Now, medical affairs can provide targeted GCP training aligned to E6 R3 expectations to study teams to know exactly how to document and manage the risks. Now, delivering real world evidence. And this is one of the things that we have talked about during the presentations. Here, externally, what medical affairs can do is sharing the fit for purpose real world evidence packages that satisfies this normative, and then call for diverse, reliable data sources. And that's critical there. And now engaging stakeholders. And this is something that medical affairs does in the daily they perform in the daily basis, and is offering clear, transparent updates to regulators, payers, and patient groups, demonstrating ongoing risk management and building trust and study integrity. So that will be my answer to that on how can medical affairs professionals will support the ICH E6 R3 compliance.
I think you've given quite a comprehensive answer there. You hit all of the notes. So another question for you is, you both mentioned the wealth of data that we have now and the wealth of publications that we have. You're saying that there are so many pieces that are now made live across the internet. It's very difficult to find the right place for you. So how can medical affairs functions integrate those data insights into existing workflows in importantly, a sustainable way and a focused way without being overwhelmed by just the sheer amount of data available?
I think I mentioned this before, but I would like to answer your question saying, like, in a very comprehensive development of the tactics and the strategic plan that medical affairs team has and is going to deploy. So typically when medical affairs is building the strategies, thinking about all this information, all this data analysis, now including clinical guidelines will leverage that conversation. So we're not talking only about the publications that are coming, but we are thinking also in the future and how that publication will potentially be included in the clinical guidelines eventually. So how as a team in medical affairs, we can have a conversation where we include these digital insights from these tools and bring the right data, as Carlos mentioned, and the right metrics to elaborate a comprehensive tactic and a strategy that talks about clinical guidelines and the impact within the community that I'm trying to reach out. In this case, can be the healthcare professionals, the KOLs, the decision makers. So including clinical guidelines is very relevant. Because even though that publication might not be included just yet, because as we talk, it can take quite some time to get there, it's going to be eventually, and potentially, I know for sure the pharmaceutical industry is looking for having that paper included as part of that decision-making process within a guideline. So to take that publication to that last step is having the conversation, create a strategy, and include the publication within that, within those key points and key data that needs to be discussed and mentioned within the community.
Yeah.
So are we going to add something there, Carlos?
Yeah, I was going to buy the mute button was not working with me. So no, yes, and I think it's a common challenge how to integrate the digital insights without becoming overwhelmed. So getting back to what I was saying before, it's important. I think I would start to first define what's the KPIs, what you want to measure, and what needs to be measured and what needs to be tracked. And this can be one or several things, and then basically search and select what data can be used, what tools can be used, what tools are out there, but maybe focus on quality rather than quantity. And this is to help. So if you know tools that are very good curators of data, and even though that they have less data, but it's good, sometimes it's worth to explore those instead of having everything, but then becoming instantly overwhelmed and ending up not using it. And then challenging part is how to integrate this. So so I think it's basically building or creating some sort of platform or insights tool but optimize to your use cases, not something that's just general. So again, getting back to the question, something that really answers your question without a lot of extra noise or insights that you or your teams won't look at it or use. So it needs to be small, it needs to be targeted, it needs to be focused on quality. Also, the learning curve, for my experience, needs to be small. Everyone is busy people, everyone here, everyone has a lot of stuff. So the time to insight needs to be short. Usually, like I say, it doesn't matter even if you have the best quality data or the best tool in the world, if it's not user friendly and you can't get to your answer in like 5 or 10 seconds, people won't use it. This is the same thing with Netflix. There were tons of streaming services out there already, but they optimize user friendliness and the delivery. And I think another thing that might be important as well is to be flexible and future proof. So if you match, because nowadays the KPIs and the metrics, it's quite dynamic. What's important today might not be tomorrow, and new metrics might come in, new key performance indicators might show up now with AI, and again, the exponential growth of data everywhere. So it needs to be flexible, and new things can come in and out. So I think in a nutshell, this is my 4 or 5 step program to integration of digital which a digital workflow without becoming overwhelmed.
I don't know.
I wanted to pick up the AI part of that. As we know, you can't go anywhere without hearing about AI at the moment. So what are the biggest focus areas in terms of AI to enhance that kind of customer engagement?
Yeah, I think there are a million things that can be done with AI and with all the data, and it's becoming faster, cheaper, and easier to do over the past few years. I think taking a step back from AI, it's making sure that the data is good, the foundational data, because that is where the AI model will feed from. So if the data is noisy and it's clustered with, things that don't matter, well, the AI answers will be affected as well. So making sure that the foundational data is solid, I think that's one of the biggest focus areas that everyone should be that should be the priority. But again, AI can be used for a lot of things, even navigating the noise. Even if there is a lot of data and everything, AI is quite good in explaining things that are complex, turning complex data sets into like a sentence that can explain everything. That would probably take us a few days or at least a few hours to navigate through the data and take some insights out of that. So it can save a lot of time summarizing things. And you can also bring some qualitative aspects to it. And I'll give you one example that we're exploring several things, but I'll give you one example that will probably come out in the next couple of months. So as part of Altmetric, I was showing you the graph with the posts, with the news, etc., etc. So we have like a lot of stuff. We have a lot of posts on all kinds of social media, and a lot of noise as well comes from it. So sometimes it helps, like if a particular, like to target particular products, to target particular people, AI can help us do that on almost a daily basis. But most importantly, and getting back to that graph of attention, not all types of attention, not all attention is good attention. That's what I wanted to say. It's harder to convey. It was better in my head. But yeah, all good attention is all attention is good attention. We can see, like, for example, retracted studies. So what we created a couple of years ago that we have now merged with AI was to sentiment analysis of how research has been disseminated. So it's not towards the, I'm not going to get into too many details, but it's not about the post itself. It's about how they use research to prove what they are saying, or to discuss, or to add to the social media discussion. And this was quite powerful, because now we can, it's not only just a number saying, yeah, your paper was mentioned like 30 times, but it's also saying your paper has been well received by this group of clinicians, or a particular demographic, or you have negative sentiment around on this stakeholder group, and then it can open like the rabbit hole and then you can begin to understand better why. And I think this is one of the most powerful things that we've done with AI, which is usually giving some meaning to the numbers and to give some more qualitative insights to our partners. But we're exploring a lot of things, and there are several focus areas. But I think one of the focus for most people is to make the numbers basically summarizing things and saving time, and also bringing some meaning to the data.
Erikka, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would love to. So I love AI, and the more you use it, you have to get used to that, right? And learn about it to really have the right information. But when you use it in this context, it's very helpful to give you focus. And when you're building the roadmap, it's very, very helpful to give you those strategics, ideas, or help you refine the roadmap of messages that you're going to try to test out as part of your communication plans. And Carlos was mentioned, for example, the sentiment analysis. So it's always good to hear the good things, right? And see the positive mentions and how our papers are doing well. But the negative analysis is also it's very good and very helpful. Sometimes what is perceived as negative is because of the adverse events profile of that specific molecule. Or is it because the design of the methodology, or is it because perhaps more real world data is needed? So that negative attention, it's really more towards, to me, is an invitation to create tactics of communication that helps to create more knowledge around that specific community. So if it's about safety and efficacy, then perhaps it's an activity that the MSLs could be working around those specific key opinion leaders that are leading that conversation, and understand why they think the way they think. Why are they perceiving this as negative, for example? So it brings a lot of value when you understand, and it helps AI to bring these conclusions and analysis to the table, because it gives you focus. It gives you the attention that you need to put some sort of activities as medical affairs, and to help you build your roadmap in a more strategic and effective way. So I think using AI in a tool that bring all those metrics and all those medias to you to help you create that those tactics and a successful medical affairs strategy plan, that to me is like that is just having everything on the table, right? And that is what technology is bringing us, helping us to optimize processes and make everything more efficient.
Thank you very much. Strategically building the roadmap. I like that. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of today's session. Thank you very much to Erikka and Carlos for joining me, for sharing your time and your expertise. Thank you to everybody who has attended the webinar, either live or on demand. If you would like to rewatch any part of today's discussion or share it with colleagues, the full on-demand recording will be available to view shortly. Thank you again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you later on at a future Farmer Forum webinar. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank you.